Hi, good evening, everyone. I hope I'm audible and visible. Yes, if you can hear me, you can just put some text in the chat box so that I know you are there. Yeah. Hi. Hi. All right. So I think we are good to go. There was some issue with the other link. That's why we are not able to start streaming. So we created a new one and we are starting now from here. All right. Yeah. So hello everyone. Welcome to this analysis. So we have already done a detailed uh, analysis of the NMAT. We have a blog post. We have an analysis on the website as well. We have done all those things. So Prasad sir has been gracious enough to take it on the first day and share the experience that he had. So you can read the entire experience on the cracking CET blog. So he has written a detailed take on the NMAT 2023. So he scored a 290 this year. So he has given a detailed take of what he did. We also have a detailed analysis of what all topics were there, what was the level of difficulty of the questions that appeared at the NMAT 2023, and what all can be a good score to clear the cutoffs for NMIMS, right? So that is basically what we are looking at today as well. So today I happened to take the NMAT myself. I took it after a long time. I think I took an NMAT after 6 years. So a lot has changed. It went from computer based in a particular slot to becoming adaptive with similar number of questions across slots. So a lot has changed. So it was a fun experience. So I'll just talk about what all I did in the run up to the test and what exactly was my experience like. Then we will talk about the kind of questions that appeared at the test, and maybe I'll take a few questions, and we will try to see what all are your chances in terms of the calls that you can get specifically from NM Mumbai core, which is what a lot of people are asking about, right? So first of all, to tell you what exactly is it that I did and how I went about the test. So the first thing that I did was I had taken a SimNMAT live. So the first of the NMAT mocks that we have on our MyIMS portal. So I had taken one of them live on YouTube. So it's still there on YouTube. You can just search for that video and you can see what the performance looked like. So first of all, I had followed a different order in that particular test, right? So I started with verbal, which is my most not really uncomfortable. So I would say, yeah, my most uncomfortable section, so to say. And then I went ahead and did LRDI, which is my second most uncomfortable section, and the section that I'm reasonably decent at, that I took at the end. That was the quant section that I did, right? So that was my order, and I generally used to follow that order, be it in CET or in any other test wherein we don't really have a specific order in which we have to attempt that particular test, right? But then again, the second thing that I did before the NMAT, so I did this yesterday. I took the official NMAT mock that is there on your portal. So you can just log into your account and you can just see at the bottom that you will have an option to take a mock NMAT by GMAT, so that you can do. So I just took it yesterday. Just get a feel of what exactly it looked like. I honestly took it during office hours, so I was busy with something else, and I took it alongside. So there were minor inconveniences and disturbances in between, but it was okay. It was not a problem. I just wanted to see what the interface looks like and what is the level of difficulty of the questions that can be expected at the test, right? So put things into perspective. I think I scored 252 in the Sim NMAT one that I took. In the official NMAT mock, I scored a 277, more or less consistent sectional performances. So 252 was, I think, some 85, 83, 84 kind of a split. It was like fairly even split, more or less. In terms of the official mock as well, I ended up making similar number of mistakes across the three sections. So I made 8 mistakes each in the quant section and the verbal section, and 7 mistakes in the reasoning section. So that is basically how it went. So more or less, I was confident enough of scoring around that range. At the actual NMAT, I chose the order in which I had done the test yesterday, right? So I started with quant, which is my best section. Then I went to the logical reasoning, second best section, and then I took verbal at the end. The reasoning was fairly straightforward. I wanted to get into the groove because I realized when I was solving the live NMAT that I was very slow to start the test. And if I'm very slow in the verbal ability section, then it creates a big problem purely because you have 28 minutes to answer 36 questions, right? And you have to be very quick off the blocks. So that is what I realized. Also, one of my friends was kind enough to point it out that I should be following this order. So I just trusted her judgment and I went ahead and did this. So it worked for me, I would say, honestly speaking, because initially I took some time getting used to the quant section. I attempted questions at a leisurely pace, and then went ahead and solved the other two sections, right? So that was what I did during the test. So that was basically what I did. Otherwise, I did not do anything much as such. I did not really study from any material. In fact, I'm at office today, so I sandwiched my attempt between two working days. So that was basically what it looked like. So nothing specific as such from my end. And I think the two mocks helped a lot to help me understand what exactly went wrong. In fact, I did something. I wrote a few notes to myself yesterday evening. So once I had taken the official mock test, I just took a few notes to myself. I'll just show it to you as to what I did. Some people might think it's a bit funny, but it looked something like, I'll show you. It looked something like this, right? I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but it looked something like this, right? So these were the kind of notes that I had made for myself. I'll just read it out. It basically read the year properly. So I had read 2019 somewhere, and the question asked about 2020 and so on. Spending versus saving, not read the question well again. Again, cubic has three roots. I assumed that it had two roots and so on. So those are the kind of mistakes that I made. So again, that was a note to self that these are the mistakes that I need to avoid. Moral of the story was very straightforward. You have to read the questions very carefully before you end up answering the actual question, right? Purely because what happens at the actual test is you will get a lot of easy questions, right? And suddenly you will see a question which is very easy. You will mark something as the answer and go ahead, and then you will realize that the question asked something else. So you found the value of x, let's say, but the question specifically asked you what was the value of 2x, right? And it becomes very easy for us to make these kind of mistakes. And at the NMAT, when there is a scaling, so Aryaman, the answer to your question is yes, there will be scaling. In fact, your marks are on that 12 to 120 scale, so it's not exactly +3 -1 kind of a situation that works here. The test will try to figure out what your level is, and it will keep on giving you questions either slightly above or slightly below that level, and try to ascertain where is it that you end up, right? So that is one thing that you have to keep in mind. I think that is what happened at the actual test as well. So of course it keeps on fluctuating, and at some point in time it consolidates, right? So getting two or three consecutive answers wrong, like is the case with say GMAT, right? That is something which I believe is also something which will damage your score at the NMAT. And to talk about the scaling overall, so I got done with the entire test. I'll talk about the actual scenarios that I faced during the test a bit later. But at the end of the test, when I looked at it, these scores that I got was what I got I got a 91 in the quant section. I got a 101 at the logical reasoning section, and I got a 105 on the verbal ability section. So progressively, my scores increased throughout the test. So that was the happy part. The sad thing is, honestly speaking, I think the scaling in quantitative skills is unforgiving, right? And I had a discussion with Prasad sir as well, and a few other students who had taken the test, right? People who feel or who felt that they had done amazingly well at the test had not really seen that kind of a score in the QS section, quantitative skills section. So don't be surprised if you take the NMAT, if you are relatively happy with your QS performance, but you see your score to be in the mid 80s or early 90s, right? So that is something which all of us have expected more or less at this point in time. That the QA scaling is much more harsh compared to the LR and the language skills scaling, right? So that is one thing that you will have to keep in mind come the actual test, right? At the actual test, if I were to talk about the quantitative skills section, the QS section that was there, so I'll just tell you what was the split like more or less. So it was fairly consistent with what we had seen on the first day of the test. So it was not as if something had drastically changed or something. If you look at the split, more or less, there were questions from arithmetic, modern math, algebra, and numbers. I did not really see anything from geometry as such, right? So there wasn't anything as such from geometry. So to say, I don't really remember anything that was there from geometry. So there were these four sections which contributed to the overall test, and we also had a couple of, or I had rather had a couple of sets on data interpretation. Honestly speaking, the data interpretation sets, one set was fairly straightforward. It was a very easy set. It was based on simple calculation. So there was one component of revenues, there was another component of revenues, there were some other heads that were there, and we had to figure out which one contributed or which one had a percentage greater than a certain amount that was given in the question, which one as a percentage of the other component was something else, what was the ratio, and so on. So very straightforward questions in one table that was there, one DI set. The other one had a couple of graphs that were linked to each other. That was on the slightly difficult side. In fact, that was one of the last few questions that I got. So out of 36 questions, I think it was question numbers 28 to 31 or so, right? So it was one of the last few questions that I got in this section. Slightly difficult set it was. And out of four questions, I think I was confident about three of them. One, I just marked something randomly and moved ahead because then I had very less time left as well. So I could not really devote a lot of time to calculating things. So it was a calculation intensive set. The good thing is the options were slightly far apart. So we could have easily managed the options or with a bit of guesswork. So that was something which worked in the favor of the set. But for someone who is scared of numbers, who is scared of looking at multiple graphs and trying to just consolidate data between 2 points, it was slightly on the difficult side, right? So that was one thing that I found to be in terms of the quantitative skills section. In terms of arithmetic, again the usual mix. There were a couple of questions on simple interest, compound interest, a couple of questions on profit and loss, and they were not the same questions, but pretty similar to what I had seen on the official mock as well. One of the profit and loss questions was on the difficult side, but the other two profit and loss questions that I had in my slot were relatively easy to manage. Percentages based questions were fairly straightforward. There was not there was not even a single question which I can grade as difficult from percentages. One data sufficiency question was there, which was based on mark price, cost price, and selling price, which was on the slightly on the difficult side, I would say. But otherwise, percentages was also straightforward. Time and work, there were a couple of very interesting questions on time and work. In fact, I had a lot of fun solving those questions because everything fell into place, right? So you know that the ratio is 2 is to 3 is to 4, let's say, and everything is in the ratio of 2 is to 3 is to something else. So you know that that 2 is to 3 is going to be the constant bit, and that something else is going to tell you as to what exactly is going to be the amount of time required to finish the work. So those kind of questions, fairly decent questions that I got. Permutations and combinations, again, a couple of questions were there. One was on data sufficiency. So again, manageable questions, but PNC was fairly straightforward. Someone with a decent enough knowledge of permutations and combinations with repetition, without repetition, with conditions, without conditions, would have been able to manage. So how many or what are the possibilities exist wherein the number is divisible by something, or how many ways are there to arrange the letters of the word such that the consonants occupy the odd places, those kind of questions. Fairly straightforward questions, manageable questions. In terms of probability as well. So one lesson I learned from the official mock was that in terms of probability, it's always a good idea to write down all the scenarios, especially if the possibilities are limited, right? So if your denominator is say 16, 32, 64 or so on, and if your numerator is expected to be 3, 5, 7 or something, it's always a good idea for you to write down all the possibilities instead of relying on mathematical formulas, right? So don't get into that, is what I would strongly suggest. Write down all the possibilities. It might take 15-20 seconds more, but you will end up getting it right for sure, right? Because the questions are fairly straightforward from probability. If you mess up while solving these kind of questions, then maybe you'll be penalized in a much harsher manner. And again, considering that the QS scaling is, I felt on the slightly harsh side, I would advise you to be a bit more careful, right? Logarithms, again, a couple of questions, fairly straightforward questions, which are manageable. Algebraic formula, there were a couple of questions. One question was extremely difficult, is again what I thought. It was probably the 35th question, I believe, second last question. And there were a lot of numbers that were there. If I had a lot of time, I would have definitely attempted it, but otherwise might not really make a lot of sense to solve it at that point in time, right? So something along the lines of a square plus ab plus b square multiplied by a minus b, and things get cancelled out, and you have to figure out which of the three are is greater than the other two, or which two are equal to each other, and so on. So it was a slightly difficult question, I thought. One on algebraic formulae. Another question on algebraic formulae was relatively straightforward. Factors and multiples, I saw a couple of questions on LCM, HCF. So make sure that you are again not discarding number theory completely. Divisibility is very important. Which of the following could be a possible value of something if this number is divisible by 12? Very nice question, interesting question, and I spent a lot of time on that question, so I vividly remember it. In terms of LCM itself, as I said, there were two questions that were there. Both of them were fairly straightforward, manageable questions. In terms of multiples, in fact, the first question that I got was based on the principle of LCM. Very easy question again, and they were very careful to ensure that you don't make a mistake in that particular question. So I'm sure you would have heard of these question types wherein one bell rings every 10 seconds, another bell rings every 12 seconds, third bell rings every 15 seconds. How many times will they ring from 5 to 5:15? And then you don't know whether to include 5 and 5:15 in your answer or not, right? NMAT thankfully didn't have that ambiguity in the question. They conveniently mentioned that you have to calculate something between 445 to 745, let's say, right? And all the values were in terms of integral numbers or integral hours. So it was fairly straightforward. So that's what the QS section looked like. Relatively easy section. Honestly speaking, I think it was pretty similar to what I saw at the official mock as well. Although the official mock, I believe, had a couple of errors in terms of the questions, but otherwise, it was more or less the similar experience to what was there in the official mock, right? So you might want to try that before you go for the actual test. In terms of data sufficiency, again, there were questions interspersed between numbers and arithmetic. So again, fairly straightforward. Nothing majorly different from what you have been doing as such. I found the DS questions to be slightly irritating, but I generally find DS questions to be irritating. So that was more or less about it. In terms of LR, very straightforward, honestly speaking, and even the verbal reasoning part was relatively straightforward, except for maybe the ones that are based on strengthening the argument. One question was there wherein I thought that there was a slight error. I thought that maybe the question wanted to ask you which of the following will strengthen the argument, but the question ended up asking which one will weaken the argument. Might have been an oversight from my side as well, but then again, it was smooth sailing in the VR section. Sequential output, there were two sets that were there, and one set was fairly straightforward, very easy. The second set I thought was very difficult, right? I could go till step 3. Step 4 was manageable. Step 5, I could not figure out what was the logic, and it was taking a lot of time. So I just let go. I just marked something randomly. Just make sure that in your case, if you are not able to figure out the logic, you have to go for a ballpark. So let's say, for example, in after step 3, it is showing 120, and after step 4, it is showing 195, let's say, or 207, let's say, for example. For another element, it is showing 130, and the next one is 235 or something. So most probably, the logic is going to be multiplied by 2 minus something, right? Now that minus something could be a previous element or whatever, but it is going to be less than into 2. Now look at the options and see if there is some option which is sort of fulfilling your requirement, right? And maybe you can mark that answer instead of just taking a wild guess. Try to see if you are able to get a ballpark, right? That is what I did for a couple of questions. The options were relatively far apart, so there was only one option which could fit this bill, this thing that I mentioned about, right? Into 2 minus something. So that was something which I think helped me in the sequential output puzzle type, which was or the sequential output set, which was on the difficult side. Right. In terms of Venn diagram, there were those Venn diagrams again, something similar to what I had seen at the official mock. There is a triangle, a circle, a square, rectangle, and each of them has some numbers. There will be some overlaps. You will have to figure out which one is where. So straightforward again, not a difficult set at all. I saw something on Venn diagrams, set theory based questions. There was one question that was there based on set theory, standalone 3-factor Venn diagram, very easy question, manageable question. In terms of decision making, there were a couple of questions, and again, I tend to disagree with a lot of these solutions that are there. So I'm not. I think my mistakes would have been mostly in verbal reasoning. Non-verbal reasoning, I'm relatively good at. So that was one thing that was there. In terms of strengthening, weakening, assumptions, and all, it was fairly straightforward. Bit of questions that were there. Not there weren't any questions which required a lot of thought or which were very ambiguous in terms of what was asked. So were extremely straightforward questions, right? I did not get any syllogisms as such. Facts and statements, there were a couple of questions that were there. Again, manageable, very easy state questions. So, in a certain city, some graduates are allowed to do something, and this college has some accreditation, those kind of questions. Very easy questions. You could just combine a couple of statements and figure out what exactly it looked like. I did not see any syllogisms as such, so that was one thing. In terms of the language skills, there were a couple of reading comprehension passages, and surprisingly, both of them appeared at the very end. So I was getting anxious because I reached 20 questions out of 36 and I didn't see any reading comprehension passages. So I started wondering how many reading comprehension passages are there, right? Because I had what 16 questions to go and I had some 15, 16 minutes. And I had sort of made up my mind that I am going to take at least 5 to 6 minutes on each RC passage. And because there were two passages left, I thought it would be touch and go towards the end. But both the passages were manageable, fairly straightforward passages. One passage was slightly difficult to read, but the other passage was very straightforward, very easily manageable passages. Although I believe I made one or two errors there, but I think otherwise it was smooth sailing. Jumbled paragraphs, except one jumbled paragraph, I thought the remaining five jumbled paragraphs were relatively straightforward, and with options, your life becomes much easier. So that was that. Analogies, I was very happy to see the analogies in the actual test. In fact, if you compare it with what happened at the sim and mat or even the official mock, I thought the analogies in the actual test were on the easier side. Of course, I did not see the answers, so maybe it could be an error on my end as well. But I thought they were relatively easy in terms of what to expect. In fact, I remember having gone through the NMAT official guide a couple of years ago, or some 3, 4 years ago, 19, I believe, and there was this list of 1,000 most frequently occurring words in the official guide, right? And I don't know if it's still a part of the OG because I haven't seen the OG this year. But I think a lot of those words appeared in today's slot as well, in my slot as well. So if someone has that bit, they might want to have a look at it, or if this year's OG has something, maybe you can have a look at that as well, right? But vocabulary was relatively easier. If you are someone who is a regular reader, you should not find a lot of difficulty answering those questions. Fill in the blanks, very straightforward. I thought that there were some 5 questions from fill in the blanks, very straightforward. In fact, you will think of a word, and most probably that word will appear in the options. It was that straightforward, right? Prepositions, very easy. So unless you struggle very badly with prepositions, it's very straightforward. There was only one question when I was slightly scared to mark the answer because there were two blanks that were filled by the same word, right? So the answer options were something like an AEE kind of a thing, right? So I was not sure if that is a typo or if it is okay. So I ended up marking it. Might have worked for me, but that was basically the language skills. Spotting the error, extremely straightforward errors, except one statement. I believe the others were very easy, very straightforward. So all your common errors that are there. One question was wherein I thought that there were two things that were slightly off in that particular statement. I went for the more obvious one. Not sure if it was right or not. But if you come across a situation wherein you think that this wording is off, but there is an obvious error, go for the obvious error, right? Don't think the obvious error will be a typo or something because of which you will not mark that answer. They don't think about it like that. It might be an inadvertent, or it will most definitely not be an inadvertent typo. There will be something wrong there, and go for the more obvious error is what I would suggest. In fact, that was one of the things that I had written for myself yesterday, right? So that was what it looked like, more or less, in terms of the test. Honestly speaking, the kind of scores that you can expect, I thought if you look at the official mock, it will more or less be similar to what you're getting at the official mocks. As I mentioned, I took the official mock in a very, I would say, informal setting, so to say. Right, I have used the rough sheet. I used my diary basically on which I scribble my day-to-day work and all those things. So that is where I did my rough work. I went out for a coffee in the middle. I lost some 5, 7 minutes, but it was okay. It was a fun experience. I would suggest that you take it a bit more seriously, so that the score that you get at your official mock more or less prepares you for what you are going to get at the actual test as well, right? So make sure that you do that. I am of course a casual taker. It doesn't matter to me what I score. So except for of course bragging rights, but otherwise it doesn't matter. So make sure that you do that, right? In terms of the overall test ambience and the kind of processes that were conducted at the center, it was fairly manageable. So I had my slot at LN College in Mumbai, in Borivali, for those of you who are from Mumbai. And I did it in the first slot in the morning, right? I'm not really a morning person, but I ended up taking it in the morning because that was the only slot available. I decided very late to take the test. So that was more or less the experience. Otherwise, it's fairly smooth sailing. You get a couple of rough sheets. You can ask for more. You get a pen. You get earplugs, the usual. So that was more or less about it, right? So I'll just answer a few questions that we have been getting in the chat, and I'll try to refer to a few tables that I have on my side so that I don't mess up in terms of the numbers that are there. So, hi Divij, hi SRRS. Yeah. Hi Divij, is this analysis for window 2? Not really window 2. It's basically, I thought that we will do a mid window analysis because we did a short poll on YouTube a few days ago, and a lot of you were planning to take it in the month of November and some in December. So we thought that, let's do this, and let's try to see if some things have changed or if something new can be learned from this experience. Yeah, 226 marks at the NMAT, but 65 marks in logical reasoning. What could happen, right? So if you look at the logical reasoning section, 65 is slightly on the lower side, I would say, because the last couple of years it has been 70s to mid 70s, right? So that could prove to be an issue, especially considering that LR this year has not been scaled down by much. So typically the trend has been that LS and LR are more or less in the 70s, and quant is generally in the high 60s. So that has generally been the trend for NMIMS Mumbai in terms of the sectional cutoffs. Overall cutoffs have more or less consolidated around the 232 mark. So that is what we are looking at. But 65 marks in logical reasoning will be most probably an issue. In terms of your overall score, I see you getting calls from, say, an NMIMS Bangalore, let's say, might have an outside chance at NMIMS Bangalore at 226. Definitely from, say, digital transformation, MBA from Indore, Hyderabad, and so on. So those are all possible options. But otherwise, NMIMS core Mumbai seems to be a bit difficult. Yeah. 236, QS 74, LR 76, LS 86. Yeah, Viraj, I think you have a good chance. In fact, if last few years numbers are any indicators, you should get a call. It will definitely be a borderline call, but it should be a call nonetheless. Yeah. 216 at the NMAT, what calls to expect? Again, so Prasad has written a detailed blog on this. In fact, he has done an analysis. He had done an analysis on NMAT 22-21 as well. At a score of 216, from what I can see, you can expect maybe a digital transformation, MBA Indore, MBA Hyderabad, MBA Business Analytics. These bits you can definitely get. And also there are a lot of colleges which will issue profile based calls, and also maybe you can try out colleges like, say, NSDA Bocconi or something, right? So you will definitely be expecting some. Aryaman, there was scaling, as I mentioned. There will be scaling. It's end of the day, it's your own performance. So it's not as if it's being compared to something. The questions have a predefined level, and if you hit a particular level and stay there, then the system assumes that you are good enough to get that level. Okay. Will the IMS NMAT mock get updated? Pratap, it's already in a. So we have a pool of questions from where we pick some questions, and they are all adaptive in nature. So at this point in time, no, will not be changing the mocks that are there. They are what they are. So you can attempt all the mocks and see what your performance is like. Some of them are difficult, some of them are easier. To give you an honest opinion, the sim NMAT one that I solved was slightly difficult compared to the actual NMAT. Now, of course, I was a bit rusty back then. I have made some really stupid errors. If you look at the last 10-15 minutes of the test, I would mostly be sitting with my hand on my head, right? So that is basically what it looked like. But otherwise, it is slightly difficult, I would say. Maybe 5-10% difficult compared to the actual test. Otherwise, it's a matter of 10, 12 marks, 15 marks here and there, right? 9 marks by average of 220. One mark by NMAT got 254. Last minute tips. Yash, again, your score is most probably going to be around that 254 mark. Just make sure that you are tuned into the entire test taking experience throughout, right? Don't slack off. 220 in IMS marks will translate into something higher, as I mentioned, 5 to 10% upside swing you can expect. So 220 plus 11 to 22 marks. So I'm assuming somewhere around 235-ish, 240-ish is something that you should be aiming at for sure. Yash, at that level, I would specifically advise you to look at your sectionals very carefully, right? You don't want to be in a situation wherein you get a good score, you hit a 240, 250, but end up getting something in the 60s or something in one of the sections. So don't do that. Make sure that you are solving the first few questions nicely. You give some time to those questions and finish the section. So that is what I would do. First NMAT mock 188 overall. Srijan, you will have to just look at what all mistakes did you make, right? So I'm assuming you were on the slower side. My second assumption, I might be wrong, but it might be that you took a lot of time answering the first few questions, so you were left with very less time to solve the remaining few questions, and that maybe led to you making some random guesses at the end, or you might not even have attempted a few questions, right? So that is basically what would have taken you to that 188 that I can see. But otherwise, just try to be a bit faster over the initial few questions. If you are not being able to solve something and it looks difficult to you, if the answer does not appear to you in a linear manner, let go of the question. You can maybe try it, or maybe you can let go of the question, mark something, and try the later ones a bit more, with a bit more intent and a lot more time on hand, right? So that is one advice that I will give you. Otherwise, in terms of content, make sure that you have covered the 4 topics that I mentioned and the question type that I mentioned. uh, if you do those many things, then I think we should be fine. Okay. How much more can we expect from IMS mocks? Ragini, again, as I mentioned, upside potential of 5 to 10% exists. So utna you can definitely expect. Um, how much to score in IMS mocks? Amit, as I mentioned again. So whatever score you're expecting at the NMAT, divided by 1.2, right? So you're expecting 240 at the NMAT, so 10% divided by 1.1. If you're expecting 240 at the NMAT, maybe a score of around 225-ish should be good enough. But again, it's not scientific. I'm just talking in terms of numbers that are coming to my mind. But try to maximize as much as you can. Okay. Yeah. How many DI questions did I face? Samar, there were 2 sets that were there. So I think there were 4 questions in each DI set. So I faced a total of 8 DI questions in my slot. Okay. Exam tomorrow, important tips. Sanket, I believe I have given a lot of tips. Make sure that you look at your mocks and you are mentally prepared to deal with the eventualities. Uh, if things go well, you should do much better at the actual test than what you did in practice. So that is the assumption. Otherwise, don't worry about it. Pratyaksh, again, in QA, which topics to focus on? I would strongly suggest focusing on say questions on simple interest, compound interest, profit and loss. Especially, you should be very fluent with the mark price, selling price, cost price intersection that you should be very clear about. That is something that you need to do. In terms of percentages, basic percentage change you should be good at. Time and work, one odd question if you might get, you might want to be better at that. Basic permutations and combinations with repetition, especially with repetition, arrangement wale questions, those you should be good at. If possible, and if you are confident enough, look at logarithms. Otherwise, let go. Chalega. Abhi, at this point in time, don't bother about new topics. And in terms of number theory, LCM, HCF, divisibility is fairly important, right? So now 5-6 topics that I mentioned. If you do that, you should be fine. Yeah, I'll take a few more questions and then I will close this session. I believe I've answered more or less everything. 220 plus in all official NMAT mocks, barely able to score 200 in IMS mocks. Atharv, as I mentioned, so one is the perception, right, that IMS mocks are difficult. A lot of people have that perception that it is difficult. So you go into that thing with that mindset that it is going to be on the difficult side. But honestly speaking, as I mentioned, 10% inflation is what you can expect. Okay. On LS, vocab based questions were there. Aryaman, yes, language skills में vocab based questions were there in the form of analogies mostly. So analogies and fill in the blanks. वहाँ पे you will need vocab. Otherwise, direct synonyms, antonyms, I didn't see anything. But the analogy questions will require you to know if they are synonyms or antonyms of each other. Expected safe score for NM Mumbai. Okay. At least a 240 is what I would be very happy with. 230s में generally 232 plus will be relatively manageable, but 232 230 थोड़ा borderline हो जाता है. तो try to cross that 240 250 if you can. Yeah. Example of some analogy. So Divij, if a poet writes a poem, then a playwright will write what? That kind of thing. That वैसे वाले analogies. What degree was similar to the official mock? Extremely similar to the official mock. I thought that it was very similar. The official mock might have 1 or 2 errors here and there. That was my only but otherwise it was pretty similar to what I saw at the official mock. So you can look. I would definitely recommend everybody to look at the official mock. ठीक है. Tell you what to avoid. Geometry you can avoid. Logarithms, if you haven't done anything, avoid. Avoid all the random division based questions. If you have got into those things, तो उसको avoid कर लेना. Very difficult questions on probability, PNC you can avoid. Time, speed, distance, I didn't see anything surprisingly. So if you want to avoid it, you can avoid it, but I don't take any responsibility in case you get 5 questions on time, speed, distance. Okay. Um, yeah, 216 in NMAT I already mentioned. 215 to 220 in both IMS and NMAT mock. Prasad, again, look at analyze them thoroughly and try to see what all are the low hanging fruits that are there. Honestly speaking, NMAT will have a very less pool of topics or smaller pool of topics compared to CAT, so that should definitely work in your favor. So वहाँ पे you can definitely work on a few things which will help you crack the actual test as well. Yeah. Sectional and overall cutoffs. Sparky again, as I mentioned, it has been more or less static. So last year, I think the QA cutoff was 70, I believe, and or it was slightly below that. So it has hovered around that 67, 70 mark, honestly. LS and LS will be more or less mid 70s, LR will be early 70s. So typically, I will expect the same thing. LS around 75, let's say, LR 71, 72, and QA maybe around 69 or 70. That is what I will look at. AK, yeah, you saw my CAT mock solving session. In fact, this year was my worst live solving performance in a long time. So, but I'm glad that you liked it and you were able to derive some value from it, right? NMIMS Hyderabad Banu is a decent college. Again, it depends on what you're comparing, what your expectations are. But it's a good brand name. It's a sister campus, but it's a good brand name at the end of the day. So if you are in in a similar league, you can maybe choose it over other colleges. We have an IMS list of rankings wherein we have bucketed colleges into A1, A2, A3 ऐसे buckets में we have divided colleges. You might want to have a look at that. See where NMIMS Hyderabad is. If you're getting something from a higher bucket, maybe you can look at that option. 12th December, you have Rahul. You have your slot on 12th December. What should you do? Again, take a few mocks and see what happens, and then maybe you can attack those specific areas that appear at the NMAT more frequently. So you will have sequential output, coding, decoding, distance between letters in a particular word, right? And again, you will have syllogism-based questions, Venn diagram-based questions. So, वो सारे question types होंगे which you might not see at the CAT. So maybe after you take 1 or 2 NMAT mocks, you will realize as to what exactly is it that you need to work on specifically, and then you can devote your energy working on that. So 27th, Ajay, I would suggest that you take a mock on the 30th, maybe take a mock on the 5th or 6th, take another mock on the 10th of November or so. After that, you will get a good idea of what needs to be done. Then you can work on those specific things and take a mock every 5 days or so till the time you take the actual test. So from now till your actual test, I'm expecting at least 7 to 8 mocks. Out of which one can be your official NMAT mock that is there, and otherwise keep on working on the areas that you need to focus on. So maybe till the CAT you can look at topics pertinent to the NMAT for 1 hour every day, let's say, and after the CAT you can look at NMAT for 2 hours every day. So that could be as viable a prep plan as there could be. Okay. 210 to 225 in IMS mocks. Gopal, again, you are in that fine range. 225 say definitely you can reach 235 to 40 easily. So make sure that you stay put. You keep on learning from the mocks. The idea is not to figure out which ones are the difficult ones, which ones are the easier ones. The idea is if you are learning something or not from each mock. And honestly speaking, I didn't see any problem with the IMS mock, honestly, right? As I said, it was slightly on the difficult side, but then again, 2 or 3 questions make it difficult, 2 or 3 questions make it easy. So it's as simple as that. So I would suggest that you stick to it. Your scores are already in a decent range. Try to see if you can add those 1 or 2 extra correct answers to your score. Blog of Prasad sir. I'll just put it in the chat box. It's crackingcet.com. So you can just have a look at it. I think it will be one of the recent posts that is there. In fact, I can just post it here because I have it open just in case people ask. Yeah. So I have put the I scored only 265. Ayush, it's a very good score. Of course, I would not have been happy with 265 as well. So I can understand where you are coming from. But 265 is a very solid score. I hope you do well in the other tests this season as well and at the CAT as well. So it's a very good score. Okay. Abhishek, just have a look at it. If it's a straightforward question which is based on only one ratio or something, go for it. Otherwise, you can let go. You can mark something randomly and move on. If that is a chronic issue, don't get stuck on DI questions, but give them 15-20 seconds. Don't just see a DI set and mark something and move on. Don't do that. Is what I would suggest. 15, 20, 30 seconds to then at least. And once you are supremely confident that there is no straight way to go from point A to point B, let go of that. Okay. Is the NMAT retake mock easier than the first attempt of mock? Prakriti, in fact, from what I heard, people who have scored well on the first attempt of their NMAT mock, official mock, have scored fewer marks on review, right? I don't know how that works, but that is what I've heard. I haven't tried it myself, but that is what I've heard. But honestly speaking, numbers matter for very little. Uh, you know the ballpark where you are going to be, more or less, that is where you will end up. So don't worry about it. ठीक है, standard NMAT, very standard NMAT. So whatever I'd expected, it was similar to what I got today. So there were no surprises whatsoever. ठीक है, 1 month is more than enough to prepare for the NMAT, so don't worry about it. 252 Harsh, I think it's more or less going to be similar to that. So anything between 245 to 260 will be my range, Harsh. So you are relatively on the safer side, unless something goes horribly wrong. ठीक है, चलो. There are only 5 preferences. What if I have not added digital transformation NMMS Hyderabad? Will I get calls? Yeah, KU should. So that should not be a problem. So that is basically for them to get an understanding of where you are applying. Application, you can apply to more institutes beyond 5 as well. So don't worry about it. Yeah, Vishesh, I think the LOD and scaling was exactly similar to what Prasad sir would have mentioned. So it's again, there were no surprises. I saw the scorecard. I felt slightly bad for missing out on 300 after coming so close, but otherwise it was completely expected. ठीक है, yeah, Avyay, yes, you can expect, very well you can expect. एक as I mentioned, 10th December का 30th November, same logic applies. You can maybe rewind this video 5 minutes, or rewind this video by 5 minutes, and you can see what I said. ठीक है, चलो, all right. Thank you everyone for turning up. For people who are joining us now and are asking questions, I have already discussed most of what you had, what you are asking right now. So you can just go through this video once. I'm sure you will get all your answers. If you still don't get your answers, you can put it in the comment section. I will try to answer to them individually. So don't worry about it. And wish you all the best for all those of you who are going to take it soon, and for all those of you who are preparing for the CAT and are hopeful of putting in the hard yards in November. We have a lot of things coming up for you, starting with the session tomorrow. So tomorrow we have a session wherein we will be looking at the toughest, most interesting sets over the last 6 years of CAT. So I'll be taking that session. So we'll be starting tomorrow evening. So stay tuned for that session. And yeah, wish you all the best with your preparation. I hope this was helpful. And yeah, I'll see you again soon in the next session. All right. Sure. Bye, everyone.